Chiefs news, analysis, and opinion every day.
At this stage in the dynasty, the Kansas City Chiefs should be consecutively losing players season after season. That's what should happen at this stage of things. They have been to 7 consecutive AFC Championship games. You know this. They've been to 3 consecutive Super Bowls. You know this. They have 3 rings during the Mahomes era. You know this as well. But the Kansas City Chiefs just agreed to terms with their big-time offensive guard, and I've got 10 things that this means on the outside of that. Extracurricular to that contract. We've got the details of the contract here. Chiefs Trey Smith agreed to a 4-year deal, $94 million extension. Subtitled, "The Chiefs and their starting right guard got it done with about 2 hours to spare," from Arrowhead Pride by Peter Sweeney. Talks persisted until about 2 hours before the deadline, but in the end, the two sides got it done. The Kansas City Chiefs and right guard Trey Smith have agreed to a 4-year contract extension. Multiple outlets, ESPN, Fox Sports, and NFL Network, report the 4-year deal is worth $94 million and $70 million guaranteed. This comes to us from Ian Rappaport on Twitter, X, XAI, whatever you want to call it. It's a 4-year, $94 million deal with a $70 million guarantee. Massive. So I did not do the math on this before turning this on. I apologize. I should have done that. You've got a $94 million deal over 4 years. That is $23.5 million a year, only slightly more than the franchise tag to which he was signed prior to this extension. Sources, the Chiefs and franchise tagged guard Trey Smith are putting the final touches on a massive new extension, making him the highest paid guard in the NFL. He gets a 4-year deal done, and there's the specifics there. But the first thing that I want to say here, this deal is slightly more on average than the franchise tag that Trey Smith had signed. The Chiefs had a little bit of room on the cap going into the season. This means that instead of being behind the money, meaning that you've got this big contract and you start off with a very low base, the Chiefs might be in position, and I haven't found terms for this anywhere. Maybe they're out there. Let me know if they are. I haven't seen them. The Chiefs might be in position where that $23.5 million average can be more up front. And you would want to do this for Trey to get him some of his money for taking a bit of what will probably be looked at as a discount deal, because next year that guard market is going to be reset. The year after, that guard market is going to be reset. They're all going to be reset on Trey Smith's deal. So 3 years from now, Trey Smith is likely to be the 10th or so highest paid guard in the league. They could give him more money up front, which would ostensibly make Trey Smith happier, but it would also leave the Chiefs with more cap space in the future than they have now. Not more cap space in the future than they would be projected out to have had that contract been in the ballooning category, right? This would be, by the way, a master stroke. This would be the next step in Brett Veach's villain arc. Being ahead of the money and not losing players is absolutely not what is supposed to happen to a dynasty. The Chiefs are a dynasty. They're able to re-sign their players, and basically all of this is predicated on the fact that the Chiefs went ahead and got rid of Tyreek Hill. They did not sign that deal and were able to keep every other piece, and they were able to get draft picks, which allowed them to to build that defense. Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis, absolute cornerstones of this defense, were in that same draft. They were not both with Tyreek Hill acquired picks. I'm not making that claim. But when you have those 2 picks in the first round, you get an absolute stud and you get a guy who is above average in George Karlaftis. You turn around the defense very, very fast. And the Chiefs, sort of have suffered because they haven't had a lot of picks early in the Bret Veach tenure, because what he was doing was trading first-round picks because he thought he had to build the team immediately, because he had the Patrick Mahomes chess piece, and he thought we have to win now. And they did win now. So interesting the way that this has happened. The number 2 thing that I think this means, Josh Simmons is real. They think they have seen enough of Josh Simmons to know he will be the starting left tackle for the next 5 seasons for the Kansas City Chiefs, likely for the rest of Patrick Mahomes' career, because you really like to re-sign those players. If Josh Simmons has 2 contracts in Kansas City, basically that puts Mahomes at 40. Wrapping up this much money in the right guard means that they think they have the left tackle position solved, and they don't have to go out and make a splash signing at left tackle. So they have the money in the O-line bucket to nail down their right guard. Remember, Bret Veach has spoken on several occasions. They don't really look at player contracts as big or small. They look at the entire position group. And if you have, for example, a Tyreek Hill earning that type of money at wide receiver, then you've probably got to skimp money the rest of the places. If you've got this money invested at offensive guard, then you've probably got to skimp a couple of the other places. The way you do that is drafting starters. Drafting starters like left tackle Josh Simmons, who will be playing on a very cheap rookie contract. Now, I don't know how much smaller the 31st or the 32nd contract is from the 31st contract, right? Josh Simmons was picked at 32 because the Chiefs were able to trade down 1 spot, pick up Jeffrey Bassa, a 5th-round linebacker, and still get Josh Simmons. But still, it is, I would imagine, a slightly smaller contract than 31. You were able to move back, do that, and still get your guy. This likely also means that they believe they have their left guard situation solved. My money is still on Kingsley Suamataia, but they have invested in a number of guys that can play guard for this team. They drafted CJ Hansen. They drafted Hunter Nourzad. They have several guys. They have a lot of UDFA that I think can be NFL guys. So with this move, some of those guys become expendable. I talk about this all the time. I know you probably get tired of hearing about it. The Chiefs will have tradable assets. The Chiefs this season will have tradable offensive linemen. The big argument comes, well, you have had so many problems at offensive line, you can't afford to trade guys away. Well, you can't afford to take all of them either. There are only probably around 10 slots on the 53 for offensive linemen, and then you have a couple on the practice squad. That's 12 guys total. I think the Chiefs have a number of guys who can play offensive line in the NFL, and you're not going to get a whole lot for them, but I think it's possible that 1 or 2 of these guys get moved this season. This means, by the way, Jawaan Taylor is likely done. Speaking of trading, right? Jawaan Taylor is likely done in Kansas City after the 2025 season because it costs too much to get rid of him this season. You can't cut him now. And next season, the Chiefs will be out of the Taylor business. One thing worth watching for, Bret Veach does not like to just cut bait. And if they cut him, they will receive no compensatory pick for him, right? He's not leaving via free agency. He would be getting cut. So the excitement over a potential trade should build. Now, I don't think that you trade him before this season. I don't think you trade him during this season. I think he makes it through 2025 as a Kansas City Chief, and then something happens. Now, be prepared to be underwhelmed for the return value for a guy like Jawaan Taylor, but getting anything in return is a step in the right direction. I say it all the time. Yasir Durant was a UDFA for the Kansas City Chiefs, traded to the New England Patriots for a 7th-round pick. That 7th-round pick ended up becoming Jalen Watson. Jalen Watson has some hardware during his time in the NFL because he plays defense for the Kansas City Chiefs. He actually gets those reps. The number 5 thing worth talking about here, I do think that the Chiefs, because of the Jawaan Taylor situation, will continue to invest at right tackle. It would seem like throwing away picks. You have Jawaan Taylor, etc. You have any number of guys that you think you can plug in there. Why continue to make those investments? If they can pluck a right tackle in the draft who can start for them, what you have is you would have Josh Simmons drafted by the Chiefs, Kingsley Suamataia drafted by the Chiefs, Creed Humphrey drafted by the Chiefs, Trey Smith drafted by the Chiefs, and right tackle X, who would be drafted by the Kansas City Chiefs. Having an all homegrown offensive line is, frankly, a great trick to pull off. And 3 of them, so say they take a right tackle in the first round of next year's draft. That's 3 of your 5 offensive linemen on rookie deals. Then as they get older, as the seasons go on, Trey Smith's deal looks cheaper. Creed Humphrey's deal looks cheaper. All of these things will compound into a snowball effect that means the Chiefs have a dynasty that just gets to keep going. That offensive line plus Patrick Mahomes equals wins. If you can pull that off, if Josh Simmons is who we think he is, if Kingsley Suamataia can be the big, nasty offensive guard that we think he can be, that means that the wins just keep racking up, and the Chiefs go from a place where they were constantly hurt on the offensive line, constantly wanting, constantly needing an offensive lineman here and there, to having a solidified, homegrown starting 5. And by the way, all of their backups would be homegrown as well. Or most of them anyway. I don't know what the future holds, but most of them would be homegrown as well. The number 6 thing this means, or that's worth thinking about from this, the offensive guard market is changing. This is an offensive guard that got franchise tagged, a tag which includes the top 5 tackle numbers in the NFL because of the way that the offensive line tag works, and ended up getting a raise after being tagged. The offensive guard market is changing. Other teams, therefore, will have to pony up for their offensive guards too, whether or not they are as good as Trey Smith. So they're going, which makes the other albatross contracts on their roster look even worse, and those numbers will crush them. Kelce, it seems, is likely to retire at the end of this season. Jawaan Taylor is likely gone after this season. There is money on this roster in those positions. Kelce has been a one great bargain for the Kansas City Chiefs, constantly taking less than he could earn on the open market. Those lines, his value and his cost, started to intersect last season. He had a very bad season for Travis Kelce. I do still think he was underpaid, even for the production that he put up last year. But that's still a very big number at a position, tight end, that is not always a very big number. If you find a young guy who you think can give you 60%, 70% of Kelce, then what you're looking at is someplace else on the roster where you can afford to spend. Jawaan Taylor is an albatross contract. Getting his numbers off of the books means that there is something else you can do somewhere else, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means later. The number 7 thing we're thinking about here, part of this decision, part of why you re-sign Trey Smith is that to this massive deal, Trey Smith is still only 26. Offensive linemen kind of routinely play late or early into their 30s, right? Trey Smith might have a third contract with a big number attached to it. Trey Smith is, at the conclusion of his rookie deal, still a young player. So they have a center on his second contract, a right guard on his second contract, potentially a left guard on his first contract, and a left tackle on his first contract. The Chiefs are suddenly young and talented on the offensive line, assuming that Josh Simmons and Kingsley Suamataia pan out. The number 8 thing worth thinking here, the Chiefs want to re-sign homegrown talent. This is something that has sort of been a worry, I think, for Chiefs fans for a little while, especially in light of L'Jarius Sneed being shipped out. But L'Jarius Sneed did not have a great season last year. L'Jarius Sneed was kind of pointed to as the worrying point for the Chiefs re-signing their own guys. Will players not want to be drafted by the Chiefs because you're not going to get that big contract, big second contract with the Chiefs? Well, they re-signed Nick Bolton. They re-signed Creed Humphrey. They've re-signed Trey Smith. They've re-signed a lot of guys that they took in and grew here. Maybe they saw Sneed's subpar season coming. There were reports about his knee, etc., prior to Sneed being shipped out. Maybe they saw that coming, which is very shrewd, which is maybe not the nicest guy thing to do. But I do think what it ultimately means is that Brett Veach is about winning. It's a nice place to be as a fan base to have a general manager that's very concerned about winning. Not that we didn't already know that, but they're willing to re-sign their homegrown guys. And anytime they're not, maybe we should trust the process. I certainly didn't particularly trust the process with the Sneed thing. I just kind of waved my hands and said, all right, well, if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. I don't see it. I don't get it. But so far, it seems to have been the right call. The next thing worth talking about here, hopefully, at least, Trent McDuffie is next. Sauce Gardner recently signed a 4-year, $120.4 million deal. That's a lot of money. What's that? $30.1 million per year, 3, 6, 9, 12. Yeah. As you hear me do rudimentary math out loud because I am not a math guy, $30 million a year for a cornerback. That is, and Trent McDuffie is, I think, likely to make more than that. Trent McDuffie perhaps not held in as high regard as Sauce Gardner. Trent McDuffie maybe not as many accolades, unless we're looking at the postseason, as Sauce Gardner. But I think he's likely to get more than that because he's signing a contract after that. Sometimes that is as simple as it is. Should the Kansas City Chiefs be able to wrap up Trent McDuffie long term, it's going to mean that they have. What it's going to mean is you're going to see the Chiefs drafting a lot of defensive ends in the future. What it's going to mean is you're going to see the Chiefs drafting a lot of defensive tackles in the future. What it means is you're going to see the Chiefs drafting a lot of wide receivers in the future because they have a lot of money wrapped up in non-defensive end, non-defensive tackle, non-wide receiver contracts. Now, obviously, Chris Jones is a defensive tackle and making a lot of money. But they have yet to be able to fill, maybe they have now, we haven't seen it, they've yet to be able to fill the spot next to Chris Jones. And part of what we're going to talk about next is the defensive end situation. But that is 50 with Patrick Mahomes, 23 with Trey Smith, 30 plus with Trent McDuffie, Those are three very large contracts the Kansas City Chiefs might be holding. And the Chiefs draft 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, 32nd every year. That being the case means they're not going to have a whole lot of shots at guys like Trent McDuffie. You don't have a whole lot of opportunities to draft guys like, well, Trey Smith. He fell in the draft because of health issues. It means you don't have a whole lot of opportunities to draft guys like Josh Simmons. Fell because of health issues, health concerns. So hanging on to those players, the big marquee names for the Chiefs, might be absolutely what has to happen. And it's kind of strange because it's kind of a funny thing to think about, perhaps I should say it this way. Because when you think back to Marty Schottenheimer, Marty built teams that were like 4 or 5 guys. Nobody else mattered. Nobody else really, it didn't matter if they were on the field. There were 4 or 5 guys for a Marty Schottenheimer team, and outside of those 4 or 5, he's got a jersey, right? So I don't think we're going to see the return to that, because I do think that Brett Veach is very much better at drafting than was Carl Peterson. I don't think there's any argument there, but you will see that congregation of the money on the roster. Just interesting the way that is going to work out. And that final point there, maybe not Karlaftis. George Karlaftis has been good, has been, I think, better than average. Last year led the Chiefs in sacks. That's a staple of your defense. I don't know that you can pay him at this point. I don't know you can shell that money out. I don't know how you could. I think that the math there is, because I think someone is going to offer George Karlaftis an awful lot of money in free agency, a type of money that would make George Karlaftis absolutely insane to re-sign with the Kansas City Chiefs. And it's easy for us to say as Chiefs fans, well, doesn't he want to win rings? Where else is he going to win rings? The Chiefs always go deep in the playoffs. Doesn't he want that? Well, that's easy to say when it's not your money, right? It's very difficult to begrudge these guys the difference of maybe tens of millions of dollars over the course of just 4 seasons. So for $2.5 million a year, there's an awful lot of quality of life that I would overlook. I overlook a lot of quality of life stuff, and I make way less than $2.5 million. So anyway, guys, those are the 10 things worth thinking about from this Trey Smith contract extension. If you like or appreciate what I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other Kansas City Chiefs fans. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, the Chiefs are the only thing I talk about on this channel. So consider hitting the subscribe button, stick around for more. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.